Greetings, Professor and fellow students. My name is Patrick Dempsey, and I'm going to talk briefly about the BuyGasCo case. If you go to the second slide of the presentation, in this presentation, I'm going to just talk about the importance of costs. I'm going to discuss the court case, BuyGasCo versus State of Florida. I'm going to talk about the different costing methods used in the case, and I'm going to discuss ABC costing and how it can be applied to the BuyGasCo case, and I'm going to make a recommendation based on our findings today. If you go to the third slide, basically, why is cost important? Well, cost is important because it's essential to know your costs in business in order to make informed managerial decisions, and especially today in the new market environment and with rising overhead costs, it's becoming increasingly important to find ways to accurately allocate indirect costs. Costs really impact profit, and so in order to be profitable or optimize profitability, business needs to know their costs and accurately assess costs. So if you move on to the next slide, in the state of Florida versus BuyGasCo Corporation, basically what happened in the case is that the judge accepted the state's costing method. It was a traditional volume-based approach that led to product cost cross-subsidization, which overcosted regular gasoline and which led to an injunction being placed against BuyGasCo. This leaves BuyGasCo executives asking how can they maintain their competitive advantage based on low prices, and it also goes to show that different costing methods can create drastically different results. So moving on to the next slide, the state's costing method versus BuyGasCo's costing method. The state used a simple volume-based approach, whereas the BuyGasCo, used a simple average approach. So the first chart there is the volume-based approach used by the state, and they allocated indirect costs based on the percentage of total gallons sold of each specific gasoline product. And you can see from the bottom row there that makes it look like that BuyGasCo is engaging in predatory pricing. Now, the second chart there is BuyGasCo's costing method, and you can see that they just simply evenly divide the indirect costs to each product, and if you follow down the calculations to the bottom, to the profit loss, this makes it seem like BuyGasCo isn't engaging in predatory pricing. Moving on to the next slide, the judge did decide to go with the state, and thus the injunction was issued. So BuyGasCo hired an expert witness to try to come up with another costing method that could be in compliance with the law and fairly allocate indirect costs. So basically the expert witness came up with 3 distinct overhead activities related to the sale of gasoline, and they would be labor activities, gasoline dispensing activities, and the kiosk activities. He did create a hypothetical kiosk. Basically, he made it 20% of the total cost of a convenience store, and he did that because the ABC analysis is just focusing on the sale of gasoline, so he estimated that that was the portion of the convenience store that the gasoline attendant needed to use when pumping gasoline and processing transactions. And that's going to affect the allocation of the reasonable rental value to activity cost pools, which we'll get to later on. Now, basically, when you do ABC, you come up with a cost hierarchy. You group activities or costs into different cost hierarchies and then place them into activity cost pools based on those hierarchies. So let's just go through some of the different examples in the hierarchy. So a unit level cost would be pump electricity because it's directly related to gallons sold. A batch activity would be labor because the attendants are processing transactions, and that's irregardless of the amount of gallons sold of the gas. Facility would be the kiosk because it's the infrastructure required for the gas attendants. And product, for this example, the expert witness did basically combined some facility level and product level. Holding tanks would be product level, whereas signs and canopies would be facility level, and he kind of grouped those together to both be product and put them in the same activity cost pool. Moving on to the next slide, this is basically, why ABC was a middle of the road between the other two methods. The first chart there is basically how the expert assigned reasonable rental value to the to two of the different activity cost pools, and he did that basically by just using the percentage of the cost of assets. And and that was affected by creating the kiosk. So if you move on to the second graph there, really the meat and potatoes of the ABC analysis, you see the three separate activity cost pools and the costs assigned to each, and you see the activity drivers that the expert uses. For two of them, it's gallons sold, that's volumetric, just like the state's costing method, and for one of them, it was just the gasoline dispensing was evenly divided amongst the three grades, and that's very similar to BuyGasCo's old method. So if you look at the column, regular calculation, the 60.3 in red, it's one of the same allocation bases used for the it's one of the same allocation bases used by the state, excuse me, and then the 1/3 there, which is in green, if you go to the previous slide with the charts, that's the allocation base that BuyGasCo used previously. So that's why it's kind of producing in the middle of the road and how it allocates indirect costs to the regular grade of gasoline. And if you look at the profit loss, we're basically coming in at about 0.01 profit, so this argues that predatory pricing didn't happen. Moving on to the next slide, ABC is going to, this is slide 8, ABC is going to provide a more accurate allocation of indirect costs. It's going to fix the product cost cross-subsidization, and thus I'd really argue that the injunction should be lifted. Finally, the last slide to conclude, BuyGasCo didn't engage in predatory pricing in this example, and this ABC is going to be a substantial improvement over BuyGasCo's previous costing method. And if BuyGasCo wants to adopt the method, the ABC method, they should really further tailor it to complement their operations. I thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a nice day.